Alright everyone, as promised, we start off the day with the epic compilation of cope posting from the legacy media involving the Biden recession. Yes, the United States is officially in a recession, according to the de facto term recession as used by the majority of the public, the majority of economists, the majority of bankers, the majority of businessmen, and the majority of politicians, at least when their party is not the one making the fiscal policies. The Republicans are about as guilty as the Democrats of this kind of obfuscation. It's sort of like how the party that's out of power worries about the debt, and the ones in power just spend more taxpayer money in the form of inflation. Speaking of inflation, of course, when you use the holistic approach that Joe Biden and the legacy media are now astroturfing and gaslighting people is relevant, you still end up with a recession. We have low labor force participation, and it appears to be slowly dropping. We have low business confidence. We have low consumer confidence. We have wages pacing well behind the inflation numbers, and you have the high inflation in general. It's approaching double-digit range, even when you're using the new fuzzy math metrics that have been used since the 80s. If you go back and you use the metrics from the 70s, inflation is already at least as bad as it was at the peak under Jimmy Carter in the late 1970s. So we are in a recession regardless of whether you use the more traditionalistic, simplistic definition, which is the proper one, which has been used, or if you use the more expansive Bidenomic definition. It really doesn't make any difference. But I thought I would compile some links here. They're all in the description, archived, of course, for posterity, for when this effort falls flat. And you already see the effort's been panned so much in just 24 hours that the Biden administration is already laying the groundwork even further for blaming the Fed for the problem, which I predicted, and I think others did too. It's not just Yellen at this point that's wringing her hands together. It's not just Elizabeth Warren's preemptive cope. The Biden White House has been talking about that too. Well, this is a transitory period. You see that term also aged like fine wine with inflation, you'll remember. We're in a transition from too much growth, that's not the problem really, you just fucked with the currency, to slow and steady growth. Well, negative GDP is not growth. If the population isn't shrinking, the GDP shouldn't shrink under any circumstances unless there's a systemic issue. So let's get right into it. Politico. Biden faces new headwind as economy shrinks again. Republicans are poised to cast aside all the economic technicalities and bash Democratic candidates up and down the midterm ballot over an economy that is already deeply unpopular with voters in both parties. Yes, it's going to be a problem for Dems, but it's not just Biden's fault. And the buck stops there, and he takes most of the blame. The other Democrats, like in the House and Senate, they passed the funny money spending. Democrats at the state level perpetuated lockdownerism in general far further than Republican governors did under the perpetual COVID emergency. And those things led to the economic crisis that we're in. There are no technicalities to discuss, though. Nobody was discussing them before it looked like recession was looming in this particular time. Nobody discussed the technicalities when there was a mini recession period after all the lockdownerism under Trump, which, by the way, already was shorter term. Nobody discussed it in any of the other recessions that we've had. Oh, there are too many technicalities, and we're not really in a recession, and it just looks out of touch. It's really a let them eat cake moment. Stop complaining, you stupid proles. You're not really in a recession. Go back to work and make more money for Klaus Schwab. It just it doesn't look very good, to tell the truth. And people are widely panning it. Again, there's a reason you're already seeing the pivot to blame the Fed. CNN Business. Who decides if the U.S. is in a recession? 8 white economists you've never heard of. Interesting. Well, we finally pegged down what a recession is. It's just that these people are problematic that declare it. Insinuating the id poll like there's a racial motive or something with regards to declaration of recession. I guess this is red meat to the Dem base that wants to put its head in the sand like a fucking ostrich and pretend that there is no economic problem. But the polls show a different reality. Biden's more than 30 points underwater with regards to economic polling. It's far worse than his general polling. It's far worse, I think, than any other aspect of the polling. The only thing that comes close is on foreign policy, and that takes a backseat most of the time to domestic issues related to money. Who cares if they're white? Who cares if they're anything? If it was 8 black economists, I bet that this headline, by the way, would not exist. 8 Asian economists that you've never heard. Can you imagine? They'd be shitting their pants if they made that insinuation. This is the ultimate cope. And CNN, we know, exactly and explicitly takes its marching orders on reporting on economic issues from the White House directly. They coordinate directly. And dubiously legally, I would add. Obama was the one that allowed the U.S. government to begin using legacy media as direct forms of propaganda. You'll remember that from his second term. It was widely panned again at the time. It has not gone away. We didn't have that problem under Trump because the entire legacy media hated him because he was actually real. With Joe Biden, they've been continuously circling the wagons for a year and a half now. And this is more of that wagon circling. CNN's attack line, I guess, is, hey, it's racist to declare that you're in a recession. Imagine that. Did you ever think that we would get to the point where this would actually be a serious headline? This isn't even an opinion piece. This is on CNN Business. This is an official editorial from CNN staff itself. Nicole Goodkind on Twitter. This is one of CNN's people, by the way. GDP fell 0.9% in the second quarter, contracting for the second straight quarter. While the U.S. is not in an official recession, many would consider this a technical recession. This is the other aspect of the cope. Technical recession. Well, we're technically in a recession, but we're not really in a recession because reasons. That's what it boils down to. It must be very, very interesting to be in a regime that has so much legacy media control, like you've, I guess, blackmailed or bribed the entire corporate journalistic complex to the point where you can force them to create newspeak terms for meanings that don't exist. There's no such thing as a technical recession. You either are in a recession or you aren't. According to the generally agreed upon definition, the U.S. is in a recession, a Biden recession by and large, a lockdown-erist recession, something that he encouraged for the first year of his term. MSN, this is a Fox News article posted there. This is Fox, by the way. GDP contraction sparks recession debate. What consumers can do now? Well, they can tighten their belts if they are capable of doing so. They can fuck themselves in the ass. I guess they can downgrade everything about their lifestyle. You'll notice that it falls in line with the Great Reset. Yeah, they will eat less meat. They will use less gasoline out of economic necessity. Seems a little bit of a coincidental timing now, doesn't it? This is Fox. Just to be clear, I've said for years they are just as much legacy media as all the others, and I constantly get shit from Tucker Carlson fans pretending that the network actually has latitude. Dude, Murdoch owns them. Murdoch's New York Post just threw Trump under the bus too. Now they're putting this shit out. This is, again, a complete lie. It's muddying the waters. There's no debate to be had. The traditional definition has been fulfilled. We are in a recession in the United States. Now, hopefully it's V-shaped. Hopefully Q3, the growth comes back. Okay, the recession's over. It only lasted 6 months. We can absorb that hit. Well, we could if the economy was otherwise reasonably healthy. Right now, of course, that's not the case. That is the general consensus of what a recession is. By the way, I would point out during the Great Recession, we didn't really have excessive inflation. During the Great Recession, at times you had deflation, actually. You'd also got this under Trump several times. There were quarters when it was basically there was no inflation whatsoever. The mark of a healthy economy when you've hyperinflated the currency for decades, generally speaking. Now we've just, flown the coop, I suppose. So Fox joining the melee of legacy media coping for their Führer. Forbes. Recession at 23.6. New misery index is getting less bad. Oh, so we're in a recession, but the misery index is actually improving. It doesn't matter if the economy is contracting and the subsequent issues that brings up. If you have high inflation and you have lower productivity, lower GDP, the economy has begun to shrink. Do you not think this eventually leads to joblessness? Of course it does. That's why they fudged the labor force participation numbers overlapping with unemployment. The unemployment rate would be considerably higher if they were being honest about that metric. Instead, they just try to lump everyone in with the simply not participating with the economy crowd instead of admitting they can't find a fucking job. That's what it is. There's no job for them to find that they qualify for. If the economy shrinks, does that mean more jobs are going to be created for them to potentially stop being unemployed? In many cases, involuntarily? No. It means the opposite. It means that you start ending up with people getting fired. Even a couple of percentage drop in the GDP can cause millions of people to potentially be put out of the job, and the situation can enter a death spiral. More people out of the job, they're buying less, therefore the profits lower further. And then they cut more jobs. Rinse and repeat. Now, at some point you stabilize. It doesn't occur forever because there's still the law of supply and demand. There is still production happening. There are still goods. There are still people willing to work. You stabilize. It doesn't necessarily mean you default to a depression or something. But with the Fed potentially overshooting the mark, massive inflation, and all of these other problems, it is at least a possibility. Forbes is talking about something entirely unrelated to the definition of recession here. Another MSM posted an article from Markets Insider. A recession could arrive by year end as it looks more unlikely the Fed will stick a soft economic landing, BOFA says. Approaching a recession. We're already in a recession. We're not approaching one. At year end, we're already in one in the middle of the year. I hope that it doesn't last through the end of the year. Interesting as though the impact would be on the midterms if Q3 continues to show the Bidenomic collapse because the economy keeps contracting and then joblessness rises and everyone's miserable and everything's fucked up. Interesting as though that would be politically. I'm not going to wish suffering on millions of people just to own the Dems. So my hope is that they're wrong. Why don't you just admit we're in a recession and then pray that it's V-shaped? Q3 it's stabilized, in Q4 we expect growth to come back. By the way, they were also talking the other day about how, whoa, these preliminary numbers are likely to get revised. It could be better than that. It could be worse. Most of the numbers that we've seen put out throughout the Biden administration because of its micromanagement strategies have been revised downwards. Number of jobs, GDP growth, etc., etc. More often than not, it's revised in the negative direction, not the positive one. So Markets Insider, what the fuck are you talking about? Why don't you just tell your probably 10 readers that we're already in the goddamn recession? Insider itself. The economy shrank in the first half of 2022, but the U.S. isn't even close to entering an actual recession. Now, I thought that there were like 5 different definitions of recession, so how do you know that? One is the standard generally used definition, 2 quarters of negative growth. We're in a recession according to that. Others are saying, well, yeah, kind of, we're in a technical recession, but, there's things differ. Now you've got Insider making a very declarative, objective statement. We're not even close to entering a recession. Yeah, the economy is shrinking, but there's literally nothing else problematic going on. Ignore the inflation, ignore the lowering real wages, ignore the housing bubble that's probably going to blow up in our face in a few months. Ignore the funny money printing. Ignore the shortages. Baby formula getting even more scarce, actually, just to tell the truth. Ignore the porting problems, the transportation issues. Literally ignore every aspect of the economy. And as long as you're completely ignorant about the state on the ground among people, then there's no problem. See, there's no recession. It's out of sight and out of mind. So there's a little bit of the co-posting. Again, links in the description cross-platform. You can go and analyze them for yourselves. There are many, many more out there, but, we're going on 14 minutes and I only had 8 links. I'm loving it. That's about all. Peace out.